Chapter 1. The Final Moment. The planet Tormach had once been a jewel of the Zethra system. The surface of the planet had been rich with the promise of life, a vast and sprawling landscape teeming with verdant forests, sparkling oceans, and the hum of civilization. Tormach had been the birthplace of an ancient and proud species, the Zethra, who had flourished for millennia, their cities soaring high into the sky, built with a grace and strength that was a testament to their advanced technological and cultural prowess. The Zethra had known peace for generations, and the stars themselves seemed to smile upon them. They were a race of great warriors, scholars, and diplomats, with a deep connection to the universe and a respect for the fragile balance that kept it all intact. But that was long ago. Lyra, a warrior and a daughter of Tormach, had known the day her world would change. She had stood upon the grand balcony of the capital city just days before the war began, looking out across the planet's oceans, feeling the pulse of the land beneath her feet. She had not known then that it would be the last time she would see her home in its full beauty. The war came swiftly, like a dark wave crashing against the shores of a peaceful ocean. The invaders, an unknown and brutal species, had arrived in their fleets, bringing with them an unrelenting storm of destruction. Their ships were vast and unyielding, their weapons unlike anything the Zethra had ever seen, cutting through the planet's defenses with terrifying precision. There was no time to prepare, no time to organize a counterattack. It had all happened too quickly. Lyra had fought valiantly alongside her comrades, her once proud people who stood their ground against the invaders with unwavering resolve. The Zethra were known throughout the galaxy as a race of warriors who fought with both intelligence and strength, but in the face of this unknown enemy, their valiant efforts proved futile. Their weapons, advanced and efficient, were no match for the invaders' brutal force, and their once glorious cities crumbled under the weight of bombs and fire. It was a massacre, a slaughter unlike anything Lyra had ever imagined. In the chaos that followed, Lyra's world turned upside down. The fleet she had once been a part of was shattered into pieces, and in the wake of the destruction, the survivors were scattered across the battlefield, left to fend for themselves. She had been among the fortunate few to escape the destruction of her city, but that had come at a cost. The once proud warriors of the Zethra had been reduced to nothing more than broken, bloodied remnants of their former selves. The planet was lost, its skies no longer filled with the sounds of Zethran voices, but with the wails of the dying and the screams of those who had lost everything. It was a death sentence, a slow and painful erosion of a proud species. Lyra had fought her way through the burning wreckage, her body aching, her mind reeling from the devastation that had fallen upon her people. Her comrades had been cut down, one by one, their blood staining the land she had once sworn to protect. She had watched as their bodies were swallowed by the flames of war, their faces twisted in agony, their cries echoing in her ears long after they had fallen silent. It was the kind of loss that shattered a soul, the kind of grief that gnawed at the edges of your mind until you could no longer remember who you were before the pain. But Lyra had survived, though she didn't know why. She had kept moving, instinct guiding her forward as the once beautiful planet around her crumbled into ruin. Now, she found herself alone in the wastelands of Tormach, her body bruised and battered, her strength fading by the hour. The sun, twin and unrelenting, beat down mercilessly on the cracked, desert surface. The once vibrant landscape was now a barren stretch of desolation, the wind howling as it picked up the remains of the shattered world around her. Her clothing, torn and stained with blood, clung to her thin frame, her feet stumbling through the endless sand and dust as she walked without purpose. There was no destination, no hope, only the slow march toward an inevitable end. She had no more fight left in her, no more reason to keep going. The war had taken everything from her. Her people, her home, her honor gone in an instant. There was nothing left for her here. She had fought for survival, but survival no longer mattered. She had seen her people torn apart, seen her comrades fall to the invaders. And now, as the remnants of her race scattered into the corners of the galaxy, Lyra found herself fading into nothingness. She had no strength left to run, no energy to fight. She had been abandoned by her people, by the universe, by everything she had ever believed in. There was no one left to help her, and no reason to keep living. Her body ached with every step, the harsh environment slowly eating away at her strength. The weight of the armor she had worn so proudly felt like a burden now, dragging her down with every movement. She collapsed to her knees, her breath coming in shallow gasps as she stared out at the vast emptiness around her. The sand beneath her fingers was coarse, like salt, and the wind stung her face as it whipped across the plains. She closed her eyes, her heart heavy with the weight of everything she had lost. She had failed. The Zethra had failed. And now, she would die alone in this wasteland, a forgotten warrior on a dying world. As her eyes fluttered closed, Lyra could feel the coldness creeping in, the sensation of her body shutting down, of her consciousness slowly slipping away. There was no fear, no panic, only the acceptance of what was to come. The endless, relentless pain was fading, and the final darkness that had been threatening her for so long finally seemed like a welcome relief. There was no more fight left in her, no more struggle. It was over. Her thoughts drifted to memories of her home, of her people, of the life she had once known. The faces of her comrades, the laughter of children playing in the streets, the beauty of the Zethra cities as they reached for the sky, these were the things that would linger in her mind as the world around her faded away. She would die here, forgotten and alone, her name lost to the winds of time. And yet, as her mind sank deeper into the fog of unconsciousness, something strange happened. A warmth, a faint pulse of energy, spread through her chest. It was a sensation she couldn't explain, a presence that seemed to fill the empty space around her. It was the last thing she felt before everything went black. The darkness was all-consuming, but she didn't fight it. She let it take her. She closed her eyes, finally surrendering to the end. The twin suns began to dip lower on the horizon, casting a crimson glow across the wasteland that stretched out before Lyra. The light was harsh, unforgiving, as though the planet itself resented her existence. Her once vibrant purple skin, now scorched and dirty, felt heavy with the weight of her survival. She had fought and bled for every breath, but she knew deep down her battle was over. The remnants of her people, her entire civilization, lay in the ashes of Tormach. She was the last of her kind, abandoned by the universe to fade into nothingness. Lyra's body had grown weaker with every step, each movement a painful reminder of how far she had fallen from the warrior she had once been. Her clothes, once a proud representation of the Zethra military, were now torn and tattered, clinging to her frame with the last threads of their purpose. She could barely recall the day when she had worn them with pride, when she had stood tall and strong with her comrades. Now, she was nothing but a broken memory. The Zethra had been obliterated, their ships decimated by an enemy they had underestimated. They had fought valiantly, but it had not been enough. Her mind was foggy, her thoughts drifting in and out of focus. She had tried to move, tried to get away from the battlefield, but the brutal heat of the desert and the toll of battle had drained her of everything. She had no more energy to fight the suffocating darkness that crept around her. Lyra's legs gave way, and she collapsed to the ground, the sand biting at her skin as she hit the earth with a dull thud. The landscape before her seemed to distort, the world spinning in chaotic patterns as she closed her eyes. Her breaths came in shallow gasps, the weight of her exhaustion and despair suffocating her. The pain of everything she had lost, the devastation of her people, the fall of her civilization filled her chest, and she could no longer keep the tears at bay. But even those tears seemed to be swallowed by the harsh desert, as if the planet itself was determined to erase all traces of her existence. "I'm sorry," she whispered into the wind, her voice barely audible. "I failed you all. I couldn't protect you. I couldn't save us." She had nothing left. The strength that had once defined her was gone, and all that remained was the cold acceptance of her fate. The universe had abandoned her, and in this wasteland, so had her will to live. And as the darkness crept further into her mind, she allowed herself to surrender. She closed her eyes, ready to leave this broken world behind. The last of the Zethra would fall here, forgotten and alone. Chapter 2. The Unexpected Awakening. But death did not come as Lyra expected. The soft, rhythmic hum of machines broke through the fog in her mind. For a brief moment, she wondered if she had finally crossed over into the afterlife, but the sensation of cool air against her skin, the gentle pressure on her back, was too real to be a dream. The heat of the desert was gone, replaced by the sterile chill of an unfamiliar environment. Lyra's eyes fluttered open, though they struggled to focus on the shapes around her. The world was blurry at first, the edges of her vision fading in and out. It took her a moment to realize she was no longer lying on the desert sands. She was lying on a soft surface, her body cradled in something or someone. The gentle rocking motion beneath her, the sound of breathing human breathing filtered into her awareness. A strange warmth seeped into her chest, not from the harsh desert sun, but from something far more personal. Her breath caught in her throat as the weight of her situation became clear. Someone had found her. Someone had saved her. Her eyes slowly began to clear, and she turned her head slightly, just enough to see the faint outline of a figure beside her. He was human, there was no doubt about it. She had encountered humans before during her diplomatic missions, but never had she imagined one of them would be the one to save her life. His hands were gently supporting her, one behind her head, the other cradling her shoulder. He was sitting beside her, his gaze fixed on her face with a look of concentration. He seemed almost too calm, too steady for someone who had just pulled a near-dead alien from the jaws of death. Lyra felt a rush of confusion flood through her mind. She wasn't supposed to be alive. She had been abandoned to die, left alone on a dying world. She had prepared for it. But here, now, in this unfamiliar place, she could feel the warmth of another living being close to her. The human's face was drawn with concern, but there was a sense of comfort in the way he looked at her, as though he had been waiting for this moment. He spoke her name softly, a gentle whisper that reached her ears like a lifeline. "You're awake," he said, his voice deep and steady, but laced with an unspoken relief. "You're safe now. I'm here." Lyra's mouth was dry, her throat raw from the long, endless journey she had endured. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked painfully. She had to force the words out. How am I still alive?" The human looked at her with a quiet intensity, as if weighing his answer carefully before speaking again. "I found you in the desert. You were barely breathing, barely hanging on. I couldn't leave you there," he said, his tone soft but firm. "I brought you to my ship. My name is Kale. You're safe now. I promise." Kale. The name settled in her mind like a distant echo. His voice, too, lingered in her thoughts. There was something about the way he spoke that reassured her, made her believe that this was real. Despite the chaos of her mind, despite the overwhelming grief that had once consumed her, she could feel a small spark of hope flicker inside her. She had been ready to die. She had closed her eyes to the world, accepting that her existence had been nothing more than a fleeting moment in the grand scheme of the universe. But now she was alive, and in the arms of a human, one of the very species that had so often been an enigma to her kind. Kale's hands were still steady on her body, but now, she could feel the warmth of his touch in a way that made her heart race. She had not expected this. She had not expected to be held, to be cared for. And yet, here she was, in the arms of a stranger who seemed to want nothing more than to help her. "Why?" Lyra asked, her voice trembling with the weight of the question. "Why did you save me? I am nothing. I have nothing left." Kale leaned in closer, his face softening as he spoke. "You're not nothing. You're a living being. You're worth saving. I couldn't just leave you out there to die. I've seen too much of that already." His words hit her like a tidal wave, and she had to fight back the surge of emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. She had been so certain that the universe had abandoned her. But now, here was this human, a species she had once viewed with suspicion and distrust, showing her an unexpected kindness. She searched his face for something, anything, answers, perhaps, or maybe just some indication of why he had done this for her. But there was only compassion in his eyes. There was no pity, no judgment, only a quiet understanding. "I don't deserve this," Lyra whispered, more to herself than to Kale. "My people, they're all gone. I'm alone. I failed them." Kale's grip on her shoulder tightened, his voice low but resolute. "You didn't fail them. You're still here. And maybe, that's enough. Maybe your story isn't over yet." Lyra blinked, unsure of how to process the words. Her chest ached, her heart filled with sorrow at the memory of what had been lost. But in the warmth of Kale's presence, she couldn't help but feel the faintest thread of something new, a possibility, perhaps, or the barest hint of something that could grow into a future she had never thought possible. For the first time since the war had taken everything from her, she allowed herself to believe that she could have a future. She wasn't alone anymore. Not entirely. "I don't know what comes next," she whispered, her voice trembling. Kale smiled gently. "We'll figure it out. Together." Chapter 2. A New Beginning. The days that followed were a blur for Lyra. She spent much of her time recovering, allowing her body to heal in the confines of Kale's ship. He treated her wounds with care, his hands always gentle, his touch steady. There was something profoundly calming about the way he cared for her. She had never imagined that a human would have such tenderness in their heart, especially toward her, an alien warrior of a fallen race. As her body began to regain strength, her mind, too, started to clear. Lyra couldn't shake the strange feeling that had taken root inside her, something between gratitude and confusion. She had expected death, but instead, she found herself in the hands of a stranger, a human who had no reason to care for her, no obligation to offer her a second chance. And yet, he had. She learned quickly that Kale wasn't like the humans she had known from her studies. He wasn't brash or reckless. He was quiet, introspective, with a sense of purpose that she couldn't fully understand. It was clear that he had his own demons, his own battles, but he kept them hidden behind the kindness he offered her. He never asked her about her past, never pressed her for details she wasn't ready to share. Instead, he focused on the present, on keeping her alive, on helping her rebuild. In return, Lyra found herself opening up to him in ways she never thought possible. The once proud warrior who had faced down entire armies now found herself vulnerable, leaning on a human for support. And for the first time in her life, she didn't mind. Kale had shown her that there was still hope, that there was still something worth living for. And for that, she would never be able to repay him. They spent weeks traveling through the galaxy, their destination unknown. Lyra didn't care where they went. For the first time, she was no longer focused on what had been lost. She was focused on what could still be. And perhaps, just perhaps, she was beginning to understand that her story had not yet ended. As Lyra's physical strength began to return, so did her sense of self. The days spent in Kale's ship, nestled in a quiet corner of the universe, provided her with a time to reflect, to heal both her body and her soul. The soft hum of the ship's engines had become a constant, soothing presence, as though it carried the promise of something more. She was no longer bound to Tormeka's scorched sands, the ghost of her lost civilization haunting her every step. Here, in the sterile confines of Kale's ship, she found something she hadn't realized. She was searching for peace. At first, Kale had insisted she take things slowly, and Lyra had complied. Her body, though healing, was still fragile, still recovering from the battle that had left her stranded. She spent her days in the small medical bay, her hands shaking slightly as she trained herself to move without pain, to breathe without the constant weight of loss pressing down on her chest. Kale was always close by, checking her vitals, preparing nourishment, offering quiet encouragement in his low, calming voice. His presence, steady and unyielding, was a balm for the raw wounds she carried. Yet, as the days turned into weeks, Lyra felt herself drawn to the ship's small observation window. In the deep silence of space, she could almost forget the horrors she had witnessed, the destruction of her people, the collapse of the world she had once fought so hard to protect. She would sit by the window for hours, her eyes staring out into the void, watching the stars flicker as the ship drifted deeper into the galaxy. There was no destination, no urgency, just the journey, just the sense that she was no longer alone in the dark. One evening, as the ship coasted past a glowing nebula, Lyra stood beside the window, her face illuminated by the soft purple light. Kale entered the room quietly, as he always did, but this time, he didn't say anything. Instead, he simply watched her, leaning against the doorframe. "You used to look at the stars like that, didn't you?" Kale asked after a long silence. "When you were a child, I mean." Lyra turned to him, surprised by the question. She had never spoken of her past to him, not in any detail. Her memories were like broken pieces of a shattered mirror, beautiful once, but now too jagged to make sense of. But Kale's voice was kind, gentle, without an ounce of judgment. She felt herself softening in his presence, as though his steady gaze was unraveling the tightly wound threads of her resistance. "I did," she admitted, her voice quiet. I used to dream of reaching them. The stars. I thought that one day, my people would live among them. We would be more than warriors, we would be explorers, teachers, leaders. But now all that's left are memories. Pieces of a dream that never came true. Kale nodded, understanding the weight behind her words. But you're still here. And I think, maybe you still have a place in the stars. Maybe it's not the place you imagined, but it's still yours. Lyra let out a shaky breath, her fingers brushing against the cool glass of the window. I don't know anymore. I don't know if there's anything left for me to do. My people are gone. My home is a graveyard. What's left for me, Kale? He stepped closer, his expression serious but soft. You're still here, Lyra. You're alive. That alone means you've got something to offer. And I don't know what your future holds, but I know it's not here. You don't belong in the past. You belong in the future. The warmth of his words seeped into her skin, reaching deep into the places she had buried her doubts and fears. She turned to him, looking at him for the first time not as a savior or a stranger, but as someone who understood. There was something between them now, something unspoken, a bond forged in the crucible of survival. I don't know where I'm going, she said, her voice trembling. But I think, for the first time, I'm starting to believe that maybe I can find my way. Kale gave her a small, encouraging smile. I believe you can. Chapter 3, The Search Begins. The next morning, Lyra woke earlier than usual. The soft hum of the ship's engines filled the air, but it was the emptiness of her thoughts that kept her awake. She had spent so much time hiding from the reality of her situation that she hadn't realized how much she had changed in Kale's presence. She had been a warrior, a soldier, a daughter of Tormach, but that was all in the past. The woman who had once fought for her people was no longer the woman who stood here now. She had been reborn in a sense, not as the Zethra warrior she had once been, but as someone new, someone who still had something to give. Lyra stood from the cot she had been sleeping on, her body still weak, but no longer entirely fragile. She had trained herself to move with purpose, to find balance in this new existence. Her mind was still caught between the past and the present, but the moments spent with Kale had made her realize that her journey wasn't over yet. She found Kale in the cockpit of the ship, as she had expected. He was at the helm, his hands steady on the controls, his face bathed in the soft blue glow of the ship's interface. The stars outside the window were like distant fires, twinkling with their own mysteries. Lyra hesitated for a moment, watching him from the doorway, before stepping inside. "Good morning," she said, her voice still carrying the remnants of sleep. Kale turned and smiled. "Good morning, Lyra. I was just adjusting the coordinates. We'll be entering the outer rim of the Veridan system in a few hours. I've got a lead on a safe haven and outpost that might have information on your people's last movements." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. The Veridan system. She had heard of it in the old days, the outposts, the colonies, but it had been years since any communication had come from that part of the galaxy. The Zethra had once held influence there, but the war had scattered their presence like dust in the wind. Could there still be a trace of her people's legacy? "You really think they'll have something there?" she asked, stepping closer to Kale, her voice trembling with a mixture of hope and doubt. "I can't promise anything," Kale said, his tone steady, "but it's the best lead we've got. It's not much, but it's something. It's a place to start." Lyra looked out the window, her gaze fixed on the stars that seemed so close, yet so distant. She had no idea what they would find in the Veridan system, or if there would even be anything left of the Zethra's presence. But for the first time in a long time, she felt the stirrings of hope deep within her chest. Maybe, just maybe, there was a future for her beyond the ruins of Tormach. "I'm ready," Lyra said, her voice firm with resolve. "Let's go." Kale looked at her, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I knew you would be." The ship hummed softly as Kale adjusted the controls, setting their course for the Veridan system. As the stars outside began to streak past them, Lyra felt something inside her shift. The past would always be with her, but it was no longer her identity. She was no longer the Zethra warrior of a lost world. She was Lyra, survivor of the void, and her story was far from over. In the growing silence of the ship, Lyra sat back in the chair beside Kale, watching the stars disappear into the depths of the unknown. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, she was no longer afraid to face it. Together, they would search for the lost fragments of the Zethra. Together, They would find what was left of her people or what could be salvaged from the ruins of war. And maybe, just maybe, in the process, they would uncover a future neither of them had ever imagined. The hum of the ship was a constant presence, a soft, reassuring sound that filled the quiet as Lyra and Kale made their way through the ship's narrow corridors. The cockpit was just a few steps away, but for some reason, Lyra found herself lingering at the threshold of the door. It was as if stepping into the cockpit, stepping into the unknown, was a final admission that she was leaving behind the remnants of her former life. "I used to think my future was written in the stars," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I had a purpose, a path laid out before me by my people. But now, it feels like I'm walking through fog lost in a galaxy that doesn't know who I am." Kale glanced over his shoulder, offering her a reassuring smile. "The stars are still there, Lyra. They just might look different from this angle. That's all." She nodded slowly, his words soothing in a way she hadn't expected. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she could believe in something again. She had spent years fighting wars, battling enemies, and in the process, lost sight of the one thing that had kept her grounded: hope. Kale had shown her that even in the face of destruction, there could still be a future worth fighting for. He had pulled her from the brink of despair and had given her the strength to keep moving forward, even when the path ahead was uncertain. As they approached the Verdant system, Lyra's pulse quickened. They had been in space for hours now, the journey smooth but long. The stars outside streaked by in an endless sea of light, and the void beyond seemed infinite, as though it had no end, no beginning. They were venturing into uncharted space, where even the most experienced explorers had yet to set foot. Verdant system in range. Kale's voice broke through her thoughts, bringing her focus back to the moment. He didn't seem anxious, not even the slightest bit, and Lyra found comfort in that. His steady hands moved across the console, adjusting the ship's trajectory. "I've got a location pinpointed," he said, glancing up at the star map that flickered in front of them. "There's an outpost. It's small, but it might have what we need. It's not a place many people would go unless they had a reason to be there." Lyra felt her heart skip a beat. "And you think my people could be here?" Kale's lips pressed into a thin line, his face unreadable. "It's a possibility. The Zethra were scattered after the invasion, but some of your people could have sought refuge in places like this. It's off the main trade routes, out of the way, a place where secrets could be kept." The ship cruised closer to the outer rim of the Verdant system, and the small, greenish planet began to take shape in front of them. It was an industrial world, but far from the bustling cities that once defined it. From the look of it, the planet had seen better days. A few small settlements dotted the surface, most of them clustered near the mining and resource extraction zones. The place was remote, harsh, perfect for someone trying to disappear. "Time to find out what we're dealing with," Kale said, his fingers hovering over the control panel. "Hold on, Lyra. This could get tricky." Lyra stood behind him, her thoughts racing. She had no idea what they would find on this planet. What was left of her people? Were there any survivors from the Zethra War, or had they all perished in the wake of the invasion? The question gnawed at her, but she refused to let it cripple her. She had a chance to make something of this, to carve out a future from the ashes of the past. She could not afford to doubt herself now. The ship descended through the atmosphere, the blue of the sky turning to a dusty orange as they approached the surface. The settlement below was small, its buildings compact, almost modular in design, clearly built with minimal resources. The landing pad was tucked away on the outskirts, hidden in plain sight. The ship landed with a soft thud, and Lyra felt the familiar jolt as gravity took hold once more. She steadied herself, feeling the cool metal of the floor beneath her feet. Kale was already unstrapping himself from the pilot's seat, moving with purpose. "Stay close," he said as he pulled on a tactical vest and grabbed a small bag of supplies. "I'll handle the talking, but keep your eyes open. We don't know who we're dealing with here." Lyra nodded. She wasn't sure what to expect from this place, but she knew it was a gamble. The outpost could hold valuable information, or it could be another dead end. But she wasn't about to give up now. Not when she had come so far. Chapter 4. The Truth of the Past. The air outside the ship was thick with the scent of metal and dust. The wind swept through the barren landscape, stirring up the orange dirt that coated the ground. The small settlement ahead was quiet, almost too quiet. It didn't seem like the kind of place that would house survivors of an intergalactic war. No signs of life, no movement, only the slow, inevitable erosion of time. Kale led the way toward the main building, a squat structure made of metal and reinforced concrete. It stood in stark contrast to the desolation surrounding it, a last remnant of what might have once been a thriving mining facility. The doors were closed, but Kale's confident stride suggested that he was no stranger to this kind of place. They reached the entrance, and Kale knocked 3 times, a rhythmic sound that echoed in the silence. Lyra's heart thudded in her chest, each beat growing louder as she stood beside him, waiting. The door slid open with a mechanical hiss, revealing a small, dimly lit interior. A figure stood in the doorway, half hidden in shadow. The figure was humanoid, but something about the way they moved told Lyra that they were not entirely human. Kale, the figure greeted in a low, gravelly voice. "I didn't expect to see you again." Kale's expression hardened slightly, but he nodded. "It's been a while. We need information. I'm looking for someone important." The figure's eyes flicked to Lyra, and she felt a chill run down her spine. The stranger's gaze lingered on her, as if searching for something beneath her alien appearance. Then, without a word, the figure stepped aside, allowing them entry. As they stepped into the building, Lyra's mind raced. She could feel the tension thick in the air, the weight of something unsaid. Kale and the figure exchanged a few quiet words, but Lyra couldn't make out the conversation. She felt like an outsider in her own story, the feeling of being caught in between 2 worlds pressing down on her. After a moment, the figure turned toward her, speaking in a tone that was almost too soft to hear. "You're looking for survivors of the Zethra? You won't find them here." Lyra's heart dropped. "What do you mean?" The figure's face softened, and for a moment, there was something almost sympathetic in their eyes. "There were no survivors from the invasion, not the way you're hoping for. The Zethra were wiped out completely. But some of their technology, some of their people's knowledge, still exists. Not here, though. Not in this outpost." Lyra's mind spun. She had known the truth in her heart, but hearing it spoken aloud felt like a blow to the chest. There was nothing left of her people, not here, not in this corner of the galaxy. But before she could react, the figure leaned forward, their eyes narrowing slightly. "However, you might want to check the ruins of the Zethra's last known fleet. There are whispers, rumors, that something survived the war. Something or someone who could change everything." Kale and Lyra exchanged a glance, both of them knowing that the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty. They didn't have all the answers, but they had one thing: each other. And with that, they would continue the search. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. "Let's go," Lyra said, her voice steady. "The search isn't over yet." And with that, they turned to leave, stepping back into the desolate world outside, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The truth of the past had been revealed, but the future was still theirs to shape.